Hurricane Irene is hanging on to its strength, blasting the East Coast with 85-mile-an-hour winds.
As Hurricane Irene approaches, the time for all of us prepare for a worst-case scenario is right now.
Winds, rains, flash floods, downed trees, and power outages possible.
Authorities have stressed there's limited time to evacuate.
Okay, man, we can't respond right now to the condition of the hurricane.
This storm has grown in size and strength during the overnight period.
110-mile-per-hour winds. Tropical force winds extend out almost 300 miles from the center of the storm.
I want to say a few words about Hurricane Irene. I urge Americans to take it seriously and provide an overview of our ongoing federal preparations for what's likely to be an extremely dangerous and costly storm.
A catastrophic event up and down the eastern seaboard for 65 million Americans.
I'm the CEO and founder of Liz Lovely Cookies in Waitsfield, Vermont. We make vegan and gluten-free cookies that we sell nationally and distribute all over the country.
I'm Jamie Beckett. I'm a senior environmental science forestry major at UVM. I was present. I was actually my first couple days in Burlington was when Tropical Storm Irene came to Vermont.
My name is Ryan McNally. I'm a senior at UVM, and I was here when Hurricane Irene hit. And I'm from Chester, Vermont, which is just in the Windsor County.
My name is Stephanie Castle, and I work at the Lake Champlain Basin Program. I'm the technical associate, and we oversee the entire Lake Champlain Basin. So we have offices in Vermont, New York, and Quebec. And we're most concerned with Lake Champlain, the water quality of Lake Champlain, and conservation efforts.
I remember being at home, and I lived across the river, so I could see my stairs, and I was watching the water level rise and knowing that pretty soon it was going to wipe out the store, and then as soon as it hit that top stair, I knew it was all over.
As I said, I'm an out-of-state student. I come from Oregon. I came out here, and it was the second day of me being here. That first weekend, I remember being extremely rainy that Sunday. And then I woke up, and my friends told me the people I just met, told me that the class was canceled, and I didn't understand why. So it was a really beautiful day that Monday, and while the rest of Vermont was dealing with the storm that was Tropical Storm Irene and all the flooding, we went and had a fun time at Red Rocks. So I spent the day jumping into the lake where all this stream discharge is ending up, and didn't really quite realize it at the time.
Starting off in Burlington, I remember Hurricane Irene hit. It was not as bad here as it was down south. So me and some of my friends were walking around in the hurricane, kind of enjoying the turbulent weather. I got a call from my mom the next day telling me that I needed to show up this following weekend and come down to see what happened. So I went down on Friday night and got into town and saw that they were living at a motel across from where our house was. And that kind of sent me into a mode of questioning of what's going on, what's happened here.
I was at my new store location, and I was planning on opening. I had no idea the storm was coming, and I had some neighbors in other businesses come over and tell me, you should really probably raise some stuff up onto some tables and think about making things higher. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? We're like, 6-8 feet off the ground. It's all gonna be okay. So we stayed in the store. We kept bringing things in and stocking. We were ready to open in about 3 days. There was a big bike race coming in. We were getting ready for tourism, and we stayed in the store long enough that we realized we should probably go home and check things out. We were living across the river from the store, so we went back home, and we had some emergency people come to our house and say, you really should start to get out. Your propane tanks are kind of exposed in the back, and they're gonna start to get ripped out and pushed down the river. And we're like, you gotta be kidding me. We had a baby at the time, so we had to start packing bottles and start putting stuff in our house on the second floor, and we eventually had to evacuate, and we didn't have a place to go. We got stuck on the street. We couldn't leave So we couldn't go like to our friend's house. We kept running into other flooded out creeks and other flooded out parts of the town, and we eventually were just stuck in our truck watching our house get flooded, watching the store get flooded. It was pretty devastating.
So I wasn't really that aware of what was actually happening for us in the state. I remember getting a couple text messages from my friends back home who knew I was in Vermont. They're like, "Are you okay? Like, are you fine?" And like, I thought Burlington wasn't that affected, and so I was living in the college bubble, not really aware of what was actually happening outside. And so it took me at least, you start hearing things. People were like, "Oh, you should go to, Waterbury and volunteer." Like, there's all these opportunities popping up, and I was just so absorbed with just acclimating myself to this foreign environment that it didn't really sink in what was actually happening and what happened. As I've grown and continue to be a student here, I've seen a lot of the post way of dealing with things. I wasn't very active with it right immediately, but I've definitely, you can't go anywhere in Vermont without seeing people retrofitting their culverts or doing something along those lines. So I've definitely seen some of that sort of behavior.
We went over to the house where I lived and saw that the entire back half of the house had been washed away. Basically the part that my grandparents lived in with all of their possessions, so they had absolutely nothing left. My grandparents lost literally everything. They didn't have much of a bank account, so all of their cash was in the house. One of the events that kind of stood out to me was that my grandfather's war medals had been washed down the river and recovered by someone down the river, and he had called us because he'd found the name and found us through some phone book, I guess, which was nice of him.
We couldn't reopen the store. People, the landlords there did ask if we would reopen, and we just thought it wasn't a good business decision. We felt like living on that river, we had seen how many times that water level had risen and fallen, and we felt like it was gonna happen soon again. So we decided to not reopen the store. We probably lost $20,000 to $30,000 just in that one little location, and we decided not to put that money back in.
The town's experience as a whole was that I remember that we would have pictures showing up on our Facebook of old wooden bridges or old bridges that we had in our town being washed away. There was the downtown area, if you want to call it that, had a couple of gas stations that were flooded through and through because they were right next to the river as well. So they had extensive flood damage and were closed for a serious amount of time. I know that a lot of people further down towards another town called Andover, which is much smaller, had a lot more issues. A lot of roads got washed out and stopped their access directly to town. And as for the houses that were close to me, I know there was another one 2 houses down that got most of it washed away, and another one that just had its entire yard gone in the back.
It's no surprise that a storm like this could take out both the house and the business. We really didn't think about that. I mean, living on the river, I could get a sense of this could easily happen anytime from snow meltage, a large storm, pushing like rainfall down and just accelerating that. I mean, hitting that bridge too. I mean, propane tanks were hitting the bridge. Like, it was crazy. I mean, there could be explosions, and I think that it's obvious looking back that this is something that could have happened to us, but we were not thinking clearly about that. And it's clearly a place people go to visit and see historic Waitsfield, but that's the reason we left historic Waitsfield. Not that I don't want to support the town, but I think the town really needs to move up to where we are now, which is Irisville. It's more of the commerce side of Waitsfield, and it's really where we need to develop, which is off the floodplain and away from the river. And it's beautiful to look at down there, but I think that this is something that's going to happen again, which is why we didn't rebuild and which is why we moved our house away. I mean, it's beautiful to live down there, but it's definitely not sustainable.
I've begun to be a little bit less ignorant about what was happening at the time, and really started to see more, hindsight's kind of 2020, and start seeing this is what we did. And I've observed a lot of streams and a lot of things that have been channelized and dredged, and I see ourselves and I see us more prone to this sort of event in the future. And I wasn't extremely active with the response to it, and I think we're going to have to be more responsive during these storm events that are they're inevitable. And I really think the community involvement is an extremely important part, and us building all these impervious surfaces and us changing, land use changes have made us more susceptible to these types of events. I think there was definitely an infrastructure part of it as much as a chance storm event.
Tropical Storm Irene was a major hit to the area on August 28th, 2011. I still remember the date. And it was sort of an event all on its own, but it was definitely made worse because we had a very, very wet spring. We had a lot of flooding in the area, a lot of storm events that saturated the soil. And so when Tropical Storm Irene came through, the ground was already wet, and so the water had no place to go. And so we had even worse flooding, I think, than we would have had the storm arrived when it was dry out.
It was in the middle of summer, or at the end of summer, and water level was still relatively high, and then with the influx of rain coming from the hurricane, it just sent it over the level. I remember my dad was worried the week before because he noticed the water level was already rather high for what we expect for that time of year. So he was kind of keeping an eye on it anyway, and as the hurricane progressed, I remember him being more and more worried about it. He kind of kept in touch with me about it. One of the biggest causes that, like I said before, came to find out was the fact that we built basically right on a riverbed on land that wasn't originally there, and I think that was a big issue. Just increases the threat of flooding immensely. If they're located in riverbeds or local areas that are close to rivers, then you're going to have a chance of them being flooded again. And really what you're going to have to do to fix that is get people out of that area or find some way of keeping water from reaching that level of intensity.
Based on what they did to kind of channel and hold the river in, they emptied the bed of the river even larger, made it wider, made it taller. They ripped out all of the trees that went along the river. So it's just barren, basically, and it's filled with boulders. They had bulldozers in there for, weeks right after the events. And living right there, my house, like the yard, they just cleaned it out. There's like maybe 3 feet a yard now, and there used to be like 20 feet a yard. So they just made it wider and taller and really more of like a monstrous channel for the storm to just accelerate even faster, I feel. And I think that's going to be devastating in the future.
In the immediate aftermath, it became apparent that people were, Vermont is very self-sufficient, and people were going in and trying to fix the streams, or what they considered fixing the streams. And so they were going in with bulldozers and heavy equipment and dredging the channels. And what we realized pretty quickly right afterwards is that needed to come to an end.
Well, it was a really warm summer. It was a tropical storm, and those are becoming more and more likely to keep making it up the eastern seaboard. Hurricane Sandy was the year right after Hurricane Irene, so they're likely and they're happening, and it's really what it is how we respond to them and what sort of development we respond to. Are we going to keep trying to go with the same solutions that haven't quite been working for us? Or are we going to start trying to take new avenues to maybe have a different approach to the problem and see it less as a problem and more as an opportunity?
While it's unusual for a storm of that size to hit the Northeast like that, per se, it's definitely something that could happen again.
What we're learning is what we thought was the 100-year floodplain is now maybe the 10-year, maybe the 50-year. These floods are happening more frequently. They're happening, they're bigger than what we expected them to be, and we just need to be prepared for them.
I think it's very likely this could happen again. Sort of the perfect storm of meltage and rain and runoff from the mountains. I think it's very likely this could happen again.
So one of the things that my parents definitely looked for in a new home when searching was not being next to a river. Wanted to avoid that whole issue all again. So we live up on a hill that overlooks the river now, but is too far up to even consider being flooded again unless it was a flood of biblical proportions. Basically, what we came to learn as we went through the auditing system with FEMA and a couple other government agencies is that the house we had originally lived in was settled on land that wasn't originally there. It was originally just one giant riverbed that people had just dumped land onto and then built cheap housing. So we really were right in the area where it was expected to flood if something like this had happened. So they kind of took that to heart and really looked for something that was built up away from a river or any chance of flooding.
Lessons I learned from Hurricane Irene were that I definitely don't want to live on the river or near water at all, really. When I went to purchase my new house, I looked for any creeks or any rivers. I'm since moving out of that house right now, and the same thing occurred to me. I'm moving in a place that the river is like, thousands of feet away. It's on the river, but there's no way it could flood. I think about that in my daily life now. I also think about that in my business. You know, if we were to expand again or move, which I hope to do in the future, and have a tour and everything, it definitely will not be anywhere near the water plane.
So when you're dealing with impervious surfaces, like you tend to be in the more urban or suburban environments, really there's a lot of things like rain gardens where you try and reduce your personal, you have like a little garden that has a bunch of vegetation that takes up the gray water from your roof or whatever runoff from your little driveway. So stormwater retention ponds, which they do in a Stowe area, where they'll take larger areas that are developed and they'll create these water bodies that hold on to the storm water, at which point they then filter it out and treat it there. I see there's a stormwater pond that they just built in right down my street. So it's, you know, it's only a little small one. It's kind of more of a rain garden type thing, but there's a lot of that sort of implementation of infrastructure.
The types of flood preventative measures that I've heard of, I know that there are a couple locations in the area around my town that they have little, I don't know if they've done it intentionally or if it was already naturally there, but there's like little distributaries that lead off to little pools of water, like ponds or small lakes or something like that, where it can divert some of the water out of rivers and into those areas.
Limiting development, preserving what's there, reconnecting the river to its natural floodplain, resizing culverts, making sure that their bridges are structurally sound. Doing all of that in the future should prepare them a lot better for future floods.
On both like in urban and agricultural environments, you really need to focus on stream buffers and respecting the river itself and where the river, when it does jump its bank, where it's going to go. So having vegetation there is really, really important. And you want to have structures in the stream, be it fallen logs or boulders or something along those lines that kind of take the water, and instead of it just being a straight tube where it just pumps out and just keeps gaining velocity as it goes downhill, it meanders and cuts back on itself, and it doesn't pick up as much stuff at that point.
Somewhere along the Williams River, there is this thing called, I think it's a weir, and it's like this, what I imagine, it's just like, looks to me like a set of steps that kind of breaks the water and keeps it from flowing too fast and overloading. So those are a couple of the different ways that at least the local area around Chester seems to deal with that.
Really important part is having wetland areas that really become huge banks of water, where when there's this huge inflow they can hold on to it and really kind of keep it there instead of having it being sent downstream. So having natural wetlands or even artificial wetlands.
There have been a lot of efforts to prevent damage from future floods, and a lot of work has been going on in Otter Creek. So if you look at the hydrograph when Tropical Storm Irene hit, Rutland is upstream from Middlebury, and Rutland just had this huge spike. It was hit hard. And then in between Rutland and Middlebury, Otter Creek can access its floodplains, and there have been a lot of efforts to preserve and enhance the wetlands along Otter Creek. And so Otter Creek having access to its floodplains really dissipated the flood in Middlebury. And so that's been just a great success story in terms of what's, preserving these wetlands, what can work to prevent damage from future floods. We have really great conservation plans in effect already, and we need to continue to fund those conservation plans and to improve upon them so that the environment itself is more resilient to flooding.
It was amazing to watch the community come together, and I think we all learned how to help each other in crisis and really come out and rally, and we're going to need that in the future if we continue to do this. But I think it would be a good thing to learn to figure out a better system together so that we're not having to pool those resources to help devastation rather than build up a community away from that whole system of rebuild and destruction.
When these types of events happen, it's economically trying, and it's one of those things that it really puts us in a bind. But what it does is it also binds us together as people and communities, and that's one of the things that Vermonters are really proud of. I know there's a huge central hub of Waterbury community that really got together, and it's been a tight-knit community ever since. And I think these opportunities after these events allow us to really decide what direction we want to invest our infrastructure in. So with this community involvement and with the exploring these other solutions out there, we can really start to have a different sort of social, economic, and environmental values that we can move forward. There's a lot of things that different people can champion different causes, and what really is important is the fact that during these events it brings people together and we have the opportunity to share their ideas, and then as a group we can adaptively manage our resources to reduce the future damage and the future costs.
And I think, the next flood, because there will be another flood, I think that Vermont will be better prepared for the next time.